Hello world, my name is Gabriela Jaeger and I am the co-founder and programs director of GCM. And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you today to our final panel and the last day of the Global Changemakers Virtual Youth Summit. On behalf of the team, a heartfelt thank you to everyone who made this possible. We put together a 5-day, 6 panels, 6 networking sessions in the record time of 2 weeks. None of it would have been possible without all the panelists coming on board in such quick notice. Our brilliant change makers are always willing to help, and our small but fantastic team. We had our doubts about whether this would work out, but we have been mind blown and realized that these virtual events can be a success and can spark meaningful learning and networking opportunities. We've had people joining from 125 countries. The networking sessions were a success, interactive and engaging, and all the panels have received very high marks in the rating polls. With all honesty, I can say that we learned a lot as an organization from this event. I want to take a moment to thank you for your donations. This event and all the different programs that we run would not be possible without them. So please know that big or small, your contribution really matters. The VYS is almost over, but we hope that you will continue to engage with us and with each other. Remember to join the Facebook group where you can all continue to network, and we will put the link to it on the chat box again. I also want to remind you of the prizes that we have for you to win either full scholarships to the Changemaker School or premium access passes to Social Shifters. To see the draw, go to our Instagram after this panel is over. We have a top-of-the-line panel today, all engaged in different sectors. We're going to talk about how these sectors need to work together to attain the SDGs through partnerships. With us is Lola Castro, Regional Director of the World Food Programme in Southern Africa and the Indian Ocean, Gillian Bosman, Member of the Provincial Parliament in Western Cape, South Africa, and GCM from 2008, Christian Muller-Holst, CEO and founder of Good Wings, Professor John Spengler, Akira Yamaguchi Professor in Environmental Health and Human Education from Harvard University, and Megan Diaz, former youth delegate of Mexico to the UN and GCM from 2017. To facilitate this panel, we have with us Daniel Macmillan Bosco-Voynick, author, youth coordinator for Oxfam, and before I hand it over to Daniel, please let me ask you to use the hashtags VYS2020 and hashtag WeAreGCM, and to use the chat functionality to send your questions for our panel. Once again, thank you, and over to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and hi everyone. Welcome to one of our last panel of this incredible summit. Now, the big theme of the summit has been connection. It's been putting people together to network, to discuss ideas, to collaborate, to realize that at this moment of global interdependence, as we try and battle this pandemic, it's more important than ever to think about how we collaborate together. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's partnerships, the importance of different sectors working together, and the role of young people in that. So we have an incredibly esteemed panel joining us from all across the spectrum of sectors. And I'm going to hand it over to each of them to discuss a little bit about their work and the importance of intersectoral collaboration. We're going to start with Gillian Bosman from South Africa. Gillian, take us away.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and good afternoon to all the change makers joining us. As Daniel mentioned, I'm Gillian Bosman. I'm a member of parliament in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament and a former city councillor, but also a very proud 2008 global change maker. It's interesting, when I thought about this panel, I really thought quite strongly about the work that's been happening in the South African context over the last 41 days around how the South African government partnered with not only business and civil society, but the South African population at large. And it highlighted some of the key elements that is required for partnerships to succeed and for us to meet our obligations under the Sustainable Development Goals. And I come from a very interesting sector, which is the legislative sector, where we are given a mandate by people to make decisions on their behalf. And it's been really interesting to see how that is possible in the time of COVID-19 and working from home. And I think if we really look at the role of elected representatives in fostering a people-centered environment for partnership, the importance of legislatures opening up is going to become a lot more important. I'm quite young, I'm 32 years old. I'm one of the youngest people in my caucus, and I'm tasked with developing and leading social development policy in the Western Cape government. And what's been really interesting is more people outside of parliaments and government have now realized how important NGOs are, because we have approximately 39 million people going hungry during this time, because a lot of those people are not able to get to work. And the feeding networks and support networks that's been set up by NGOs and NPOs have probably been the most important. And I'm particularly inspired by many of the young people who've not only come up with solutions to feeding their community, but also have come up with future forward solutions. So I'm really interested in how young people can feed into government, feed into the participation, and how we can localize that participation. But more importantly, how we can stop saying that young people need a seat at the table, but that young people actually get an opportunity to speak once they're at the table. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Gillian. Super, super inspiring. Lola?
Yes, good afternoon to all the Global Changemakers. A real pleasure to be here with you. For me, it's my first time to meet all of you. And as Daniel has said, and Gabriela, my name is Lola Castro. I come from what I call the coastal Africa of Spain, because I come from the Canary Islands. At this moment, I'm the regional director of the United Nations World Food Programme in Southern Africa, meaning the whole SADC region, starting from the Congos all the way down to South Africa. So Gillian and me, in fact, we're in the same country at this moment. He's in the coast and I'm in the highlands of Johannesburg. But basically, you probably have heard about what the World Food Programme does, or at least for sure you have seen our helicopters flying in cyclones and trying to provide food and support to stranded people in the waters, or really when there is a drought, WFP comes in, or if there is a conflict as well. But I think you probably have seen this part of saving lives of WFP, when millions of people around the world, around 100 million people around the world, receive either food or cash from my United Nations agency in a year. But also, I think today we will discuss more about the other part, about the part of changing lives, and what we do as World Food Programme to ensure that we work in partnership. As Gillian very well say, we are not alone in the world. To achieve the SDGs, we really need to get everybody together. And for World Food Programme, critical actors, critical people to work with is the communities first, from the bottom up. Without communities and without the participation of communities, we cannot do anything. The local authorities, the civil society, the CBOs, community-based organizations are critical in the work and in the fight against hunger that we have in the world. To make a point, I think the relevance of SDG 17 is more vital now than ever. In the times of COVID, if we either don't work together and don't really coordinate, avoid duplications, and put our priorities right, we will be unable to really overcome the challenges that this virus has brought to our lives and to African continent specifically. For us, the coordination also with private sector is absolutely critical, that the borders are open, that the ports are open, that the food circulates in the continent, because as we know, we produce, but not enough. But basically, I also to make sure that I emphasize the importance of the youth, the importance of the youth bringing both the commitment and the innovation to make this happen, and to ensure that we are all in the same fight. We are fighting at this moment to get the world rid of this coronavirus, but to make sure that so many millions of people don't go down backwards into poverty and hunger, because that is the big challenge. We had done an estimation, and I finish here, where we we are forecasting that around 267 million people more will be hungry due to this virus. And what we can do together, maybe today we can discuss more about that. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lola, for spelling out the challenge so well at the end there. Next, we have John Spengler. I think, John, you may be on mute we can't hear you.
Good, thanks, they did it for me. Yeah, well, greetings all, afternoon, morning, around the world. So Jack Spengler, I've been a professor at Harvard for a number of years, and I have to characterize my career as mostly academic, doing research on the health effects of pollution outdoors and many things that we breathe indoors. But several years ago, in fact, it was before the SDGs, it was probably in the early 2000s, I became the director of the Center for Health and the Global Environment at Harvard. And I realized that, all our work in publishing was only moving the bar so much. It would be read by a handful of people that were concentrated in our particular areas of research. So we set out in that center, and it's become the modality of my life now, to mend the relationship we have with this earth. And I really saw that it was fractured, and everything nature's telling us it's that way. So how were we going to do this? And so supporting our center were a number of corporations, and they would pay in and help finance our operations along with the research grants. But we started to think deeply about how we could be more effective. And this is where the partnerships come in. So I was sort of inspired by Yo-Yo Ma. So Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cellist, and most people recognize him around the world, he formed the Silk Road Ensemble. And I recommend this for everyone. Listen to this music, the Silk Road. It's the genre of the world. He brought Indian music, African music, jazz into this. It was a profusion of sounds, and it moves the soul. And he called it a radical collaboration. So I said, we need radical collaborations. So we set out to work with our corporate sector on really doing things that were radically different, because the corporate sector allowed us to take our research, the evidence, and to scale it to professionals into the practice much faster. So we were supported with 3M, United Technology, great program with Levi Strauss. We worked with the Dutch pension fund on finance. Now, I never thought I'd be working with the financial world, but they wanted to show that their investments were doing good for the world. So we developed the metrics for that. So I can elaborate on a couple of other examples. One I'm looking at Megan here, one we did with the in Mexico, which I'll share later at some point. But that's what I felt was absolutely needed. And it opened up new avenues, even for our own graduate students, to now go out and work in the private sector to be more effective. And that's how we began to scale our impacts.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John, for sharing and for bringing in the spirit of radical collaboration. That's very much the kind of spirit we're trying to generate today. And so in that spirit, Christian, would you like to share your own role in extending those collaborations?
Sure, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, good. Well, thank you for having me, fellow panelists and changemakers, representing the private sector and the travel sector nonetheless. In these days, it's really crazy times. 5 years ago, I was amazed that the existing industry, the travel industry, was not in any way taking steps in meeting the demand for sustainable solutions when it comes to travel. And I was not part of the industry, but I basically started to look into it. And I found that it was a low margin business and it was controlled by a handful of large players. And basically that was the reason that no one really dared to do anything. And I could have gone on to something else, but I thought, well, we have to disseminate and really find out what are the unit economics and the dynamics of this industry. And what I learned by looking into the open records of Expedia and Priceline and these major corporations was that they were not really travel companies. They were just marketing machines. So every time you spend $1,000 on hotels.com, 15 to 20% goes to more Google advertising or mass media. And I said, well, in a Michael Porter perspective, how does that create any value to anyone? It creates value to Google, I'm sure, and other players, but for the traveler, it creates very, very little value, and for society as a whole, it creates no value. So having worked with the nonprofit sector for 20 years, I've seen how the nonprofits have transitioned from being, sorry if I offend anyone, but being a little bit old school to being more engaged in private sector partnerships and looking into new types of fundraising schemes, especially the ones that can be recurring, you know, so you don't have to chase that grant every year, but you can start working strategic, long-term. And I said, well, let's combine those two. Let's combine this evolution in fundraising management, in nonprofit innovation management, with the needs of the travel sector. So we've basically built an online platform. We've totally discarded the traditional go-to-market. So we built our brand and acquire clients through partnerships. We have 150 nonprofits in 45 countries, and they bring in 3,000 to 4,000 businesses every year. So we can have, you know, the fraction of the cost of our competitors. We're not 15,000 people in the US. We're 23 people up the street in Copenhagen. But we offer the same product, we offer the same service, and we can even go below market on price. And that's extremely important, because this partnership model is not only giving back to society, but it's actually making it mainstream, democratizing sustainability action, because we can make it worthwhile making the green choice, so to say. So I hope that in any way can offer some inspiration for the change makers and for the discussion later. Thank you.
Really wonderful inspiration. Thank you, Christian. And to take us home in this first round, I'd love to bring Megan into the conversation. I think you might have to unmute, Megan. We can't really, I think we still can't hear you. Try one more time. Now we can hear you a little bit, but
maybe without the camera.
Yeah, maybe. Do you want to try just turning off your camera and seeing if you can just use the audio?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, but very broken and with echo. Do you want to try just turning off your camera, just using audio? Okay, we can't hear you. What we can do is we can try fix the problem. Meanwhile, we'll continue with the next round, and we'll get back to you and give you more time. Is that okay, Megan? Amazing. So unfortunately, we couldn't hear from Megan then, but I'm sure we're going to be able to hear later on in the session. But some really, really interesting initial reflections and thoughts from our panelists. I think the one question that's coming up from young people is just in the chat is really the how. So I think there's been a really, really clear stress made on this, on the importance of looking for these radical collaborations, for these openings for mutual learning and for sustaining each other. But in the real world, where we do have division, where we do have different agendas, where we do have different levels of power and access to resources, there's mistrust of communities between government often, or a kind of a mainstream understanding that different institutions have different agendas. So my question for the panelists is, how practically, what are some good tools that you've used or good ways to encourage collaboration and partnership? How do you address issues of mistrust and really build the ingredients for that radical collaboration that John was speaking about? So the question is the how. What are the practices that you would suggest or encourage based on your experience? Gillian, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. One of the key tools that's helped in the South African context, I think, has been to open up the processes and to help demystify how government actually works. So what we've done in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament is when government departments come to present their annual performance plans or their strategic plans or to table their budgets, we've turned those into public hearings. So we've invited members of the public in, we invite NGOs, and we invite people who understand the budgeting processes. And we've asked governments to look at how do you link public participation to decision making? Because one of the things in public policy is very often politicians and researchers tell communities what they need. They don't really ask communities what they need. And what we found with young people specifically, young people are a lot more vocal in terms of translating their needs. And they're able to translate that quite vocally. And with the advent of social media, specifically WhatsApp, they've been able to do that quite successfully. So we've now taken the traditional local community engagement forum, or as we call it, the ward level community meetings. We've now digitized that. We are currently, actually 2 days ago, we just launched quite an innovative process for legislative public participation. So the Division of Revenue Act for the country is currently before Parliament. And because that requires public participation, but none of us are able to gather for large community meetings, we've now opened a WhatsApp line. We've asked members of the public to submit voice notes. So their voice notes actually now act as a submission. And we found that what you do there immediately, you provide more equitable sense of access to the budgeting process. So something that was quite technical a month ago, you're now able to send people versions of the budget. They're able to tell you this budget doesn't work for me. And they're able to do that by just recording a voice note. So it's quite a low tech but high impact solution.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Julian. That's a really, really good learnings just on how to make that process more accessible and inclusive. I'd like to hand it over to Lola Castro.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. You know, in the World Food Program, we're trying to serve, as I say, millions of people with food or cash transfers. But lately, we have really changed our modus operandi. How basically we try to buy as closer to the people who need it as possible. And to do that, obviously, we need to work with the very specific groups, which are the smallholder farmers, which are mostly women and youth, in fact. And this is where there is a big cutting edge, a big change. Before, food assistance used to come across the oceans from big producers and big farms. Now we buy mostly locally, also extremely good against the climate change impact, and as well as making sure that low-income people receive some benefits from this. But that's not all. How can we do that in an effective way? And basically that's possible through a number of platforms that are linking the smallholder farmers with the private sector through public interventions. So let me give you some examples. For example, in Tanzania and Zambia, we work with thousands of smallholder farmers, women and youth, which are producing, and they offload in this platform, in this app, what they are producing and when it's available. And then the private sector basically looks there, and they look what they need, and they will pledge. And at the same time, the public sector is putting the market prices at any given day. So there is a joint coordination there, which allows us and the private sector to buy from the smallholder farmers in an efficient way, using new technologies that really create, as you say, is a radical partnership that benefits the ones that were left behind in the past. So now we are engaging with people who are in very deep rural villages of Africa, and they are accessing markets, getting income, and that food is being used to feed the poorest of the poor in the continent as well. So basically a win-win radical partnership that engages a lot of sectors and a cross-cutting levels of the community and the society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola, for sharing that. Those really, really inspiring examples of the intersection between governments and public and smallholder farmers. Really, really inspiring. John, what are your thoughts?
Sure, this is a tough question. It makes me reflect on maybe my world is kind of rarefied in some ways, but as the academy steps out of our academy confines to interact with private sector, public sector, we worked with public housing. Talk about clash of cultures. To move from Harvard to work with private sector companies or to public sector providers of good, decent housing. We just have a different lexicon, different reward systems, and different constraints. And I find there's friction points in those interactions. And it's not always in the direction that I suspected. The friction points are within my own institution, where other faculty steeped in traditional research and publications think of us as advocates or think of us as consultants and not necessarily objective investigators in our own right trying to make a difference. So this has not been easy in both internally and externally. Dealing externally, everyone wants to leverage the brand of Harvard. That gives a little shine to what happens. So we have to guard against that, and there are good firewalls that we have to put in place. And in one conflict in particular, we had really important findings, and the sponsor, the people we're working with, private sector, wanted to go to the Wall Street Journal first. I said, no, we have to publish, because if we don't publish, people won't believe us as serious investigators, and the results won't be as effective. So they understood that, but we had to negotiate that space between us. So there's a learning curve to this, for sure.
Very
I
honest.
should share with Kristen, I should share our work with the World Travel and Tourism Council. Some similar conflicts.
I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, John. Christian, what would be your advice just on practices as you've been working to build this partnership between the private sector and NGO?
How I also heard the question initially was about trust and the role of trust in engaging partnerships. So let me start there. I think very much in line with or inspired by what John said. When we approached the first batches of nonprofits, we obviously started in our home country or in the Nordic countries and then expanded. There was a lot of distrust. Were we just going to, greenwash the brand of WWF? I don't believe they had ever partnered with anyone within travel. So we really need to be as transparent and align expectations. So what we did from the get-go and are still doing is that all the partners, the nonprofits that we work with, we do very thorough vetting of them and also let them look into our books. We have like memorandum of understandings, really outlining what is expected of you, vice versa. In regards to our clients, I think this online travel sector is potentially one of the most unethical ones. I mean, they're profiling you, they're throwing around before prices that are, completely ridiculous. And I decided from the get-go that we did not want to become that kind of type of company. So we're not doing that. And so to build trust towards our business clients, it's primarily businesses that use our service, or at least organizations. So we're not so much B2C, but more to B2B. We try to be as transparent as possible. Also, in regards to the nonprofits and the impact that you can have when you're booking hotels through us, because a lot of businesses also have a misperception of nonprofits and what is really the impact. If I give $1,000, how much ends up planting trees, feeding the poor, rebuilding schools, etc. So we try to be as transparent as we can throughout our economy and actually just lay it out so that we display what are the unit economics of good wings. So I think, it's really about aligning expectations and increasing transparency.
Amazing. There's a lot of wonderful commonality between what we've all been saying in terms of building trust, building closeness and inclusivity, building firewalls to protect against certain things. I'd love to, if Megan is able to join with us, I'm not sure if we'd be able to resolve technical issues. Would love to hear Megan speak a bit about good practices that they've encountered, but also a bit about their trajectory. Megan, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So first off, thank you so much for the invitation to this panel. I'm so glad to be here with amazing change makers from different sectors. And I do apologize for the audio and I don't know what happened with this technical issues. So a little bit about myself. I am from Mexico. I'm 22 years old. I'm an international relations student. But besides being an international relations student, I'm also an activist for sustainable development. Through my activism in sustainable development, I've learned that if you want to make change in this world, you cannot do it alone. So it's very important to try to work together with other people, with other actors, and of course with different sectors. I've been carrying out my activism through three main projects. One of them is Involucratec. Involucratec is a student association I created in 2015. With this student association, our objective is basically to empower young people and children to transform their communities with the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the projects we have is to give workshops about the 2030 agenda. So we give workshops about gender equality, about peace, about responsible consumption, and inspire young people and other and children to be able to make changes in their communities. So in this project that we have, partnerships have been really important, especially with the government, since many of the workshops we have given, well, we're not like a big organization, so we don't have headquarters. And the government of San Pedro Cholula, Puebla, that's where I live, has provided us with spaces to be able to give these workshops. So that is just a small example of why is it important to collaborate with other actors. And just briefly to conclude, I also work with an organization called My World Mexico. That's a national organization, and their partnerships are also really important. This organization has the aim of fostering the 2030 agenda. And as part of this organization, I have been working alongside governments and institutions to train them on the 2030 agenda. So we have been giving trainings to local governments, to universities, and of course, if there's no collaboration from both sides, then it wouldn't be possible.
Thank you so much, Megan, for that incredible introduction. I wanted to ask you, picking up on the last point that we did as a panel, is so in terms of those partnerships with the local government to be able to do the workshops or outreach to universities, what are some principles or good practices to sustain that partnership that you found have worked for you?
So I think some principles is first approaching them, because sometimes I think young people are afraid of approaching other actors. They, for example, when we started, I said, let's reach the government. I said that to my organization, and they were thinking, no, because they might not pay attention to us. They might think that our project is too small, too not important. So I think that the first principle would be approach them. There are many ways in which you can approach the government. For example, with My World Mexico, the government, we work with the Foreign Affairs Secretariat as well, and they have a branch of the Foreign Affairs Secretariat that's exclusive for civil society. With the local government of San Pedro Cholula, that's the one that I work with Involucratec, they have a youth council. So look for these mechanisms, look for these places where you can start embedding your work. So I think that's one of the main principles. Don't be afraid, and be informed about which mechanisms and which routes you have to follow in order to create these partnerships.
Really great piece of advice. Thank you so much, Megan, for sharing it. We're going to have just one final question coming from me before we open it up to our young participants. So this question is one that's really coming from a lot of young people. We're living in a pretty confusing moment for a lot of young activists. We're trying to start out, trying to understand what to do, where to lend their energies and their efforts at this moment. from what everyone is saying as well, we're not just facing a pandemic, we're facing a much wider crisis, an economic crisis, an ecological crisis, a crisis in the relationship to nature, a food crisis, and a democratic crisis in many cases. So a lot of young people who have been listening to sessions are really in a position of puzzlement. I am incredibly inspired and I want to do something, but I'm trying to find my feet. And a lot of our sessions across these last days have been giving tools, giving ideas. I'd want the panelists to just address that confusion. If you were in a position of a young activist right now, what would you encourage people to be thinking about in terms of partnership? What unlikely alliances would you urge young people to consider building? And in the current systemic crisis we are in, what partnerships and collaborations are urgent more than ever? So I would encourage the panelists to speak to activists on the other end of the line who are young activists who are starting out thinking how they can contribute, but a bit bewildered at the moment about what role they want to play in the next decade in terms of the SDGs. So that would be my ask of the panelists. What would be your advice to a young activist starting out now, trying to make sense of a world that is in a bit of disarray? Gillian, would you like to start us off? I know it's a very small question, but try your best at however you want to answer it.
Sure. I think for me, one of the key issues around activism is, and if I was sort of a 16-year-old wanting to sort of enter the space, I would think about sort of what the theory of change is as an individual. And I think we've gotten a bit carried away in terms of what the possibilities are, but what we mustn't lose sight of is that change starts with an individual. I think the most important thing that can happen and that individuals should look at doing at the moment is to find out, how do I make a difference in my immediate space? And how do I collaborate with the people who are like-minded and the people who have those resources in my community? How do we then work in partnership with others to expand that collaboration to include people in my town, then to include people in your country, in your region, and then how do you sort of globalize that? I think if we apply that model of change to sort of looking at how do you build on what you have, that's important. I also think amongst sort of all of the anxiety that we're all facing, there's a really unique opportunity to go back to the drawing board, because we know that the systems and international practices in place are not working. We know that there's an opportunity to sort of break things down. An interesting example, in the South African case, our president launched a national solidarity fund a few weeks ago. And it was the state asking communities and asking individuals and asking wealthy businesses to donate to a national fund that was going to assist with the COVID-19 efforts. I was quite skeptical that that fund was going to have any impact, because we've had a massive issue with corruption in South Africa. But within 21 days, that fund has raised more than 6 billion rand. A large amount of that has come from NPOs, organizations, and individuals. So I donated 33% of my sort of salary for the next 3 months, for instance. But I did that by asking NPOs and NGOs, are you getting access to this fund? So I formed a collaboration by asking those questions. So I think we need to look at what are the new things that can be put in place. And I think young people really need to look at, how do you become an agitator in your own community? We very often look for resources and opportunities outside of the spaces that we operate in, but we need to look at how do we build those partnerships. And I think one of the things that needs to happen is, young people, we need to take stock of what is already there. If you look at most national, local and provincial governments, you'll find that there's a myriad of youth policies and tools actually legislated already, but nobody is applying those and nobody's holding government to account for those. So in the South African case, for instance, we've got various national, local, as well as international mechanisms for government to engage with young people, but government is not doing that. So my advice would be, do some surveying to see what you've got in your community, build on that and form those strategic partnerships, then go out and get the critical mass going and continue to expand your reach and to form those networks. But importantly also, now is the time to look for those unlikely partnerships and the people that we wouldn't normally want to work with. And now is also the time to go and agitate for something new to be built. That would be my advice.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Gillian. Very, very comprehensive and clarifying. Yola, what would you want to add yourself?
Yes, if somebody is feeling that there is nothing to do, just give me a call. I'm feeling so overwhelmed and all the things we have to do that for sure I can offer a lot of ideas. But let me try. I think I want to follow very well what Gillian has said. I think he put the top line, and maybe I land a little bit. Look, as a positive person and dealing with millions of people at this moment, which are more vulnerable than before, I think that we should look at the opportunities that are coming out of this very negative situation. And if I were you, and I'm in a city or in the urban area, I very much will be looking like, okay, people are in lockdown in many urban areas. They have no access even to the minimum income to be able to feed themselves or to get water, etc. What can I do to make sure that we improve the minimum and basic assets to these communities? Maybe this is the opportunity to advocate, to lobby, to work towards getting water to the very poor communities, getting the health and sanitation facilities, getting the food, as Gillian mentioned, like the Solidarity Fund is doing a great job in South Africa at this moment through a great partnership. With whom can I ally to really make this happen? Then if I'm anywhere and I'm looking at vulnerable groups, I will tell you, look at, for example, the millions of school children that are now at home, and how many of those millions are able to homeschool through computer? Very few. What can I do to make sure these school children will go back to school, to help them to maintain their learning in a way or another? That's another big space we can work together as youth and civil society and authorities. Another one is all these vulnerable populations that, for example, in Southern Africa, we have the highest levels of HIV/AIDS in the world, the percentage. So these are immunodepressed people, which the coronavirus or COVID is going to affect greatly. So how can I support these most depressed, vulnerable groups in urban or rural areas to really have access to the ARVs and access to services and access to health? Things very practical that you can do. And going back to Gillian, go down to your community, talk to the partners, but also look at the gaps and look at the gaps that are now, and look at them as opportunities. What can we do differently? And let's try to make this sustainable. Let's try that. If we are going to try to give water to some communities, that will be forever, not just for this period of time. And if we do that really with a lot of advocacy, we can make a big difference. And alliances will be plenty. I think everybody's open. Everybody in this new world, I call it, is really open to link, align, and offer at least some advice, if not money, if not in-kind support or anything to make it happen. Because I think we are, as I said at the beginning, we are on this together and we need to overcome it. So it's too big for one alone. Partnerships are critical more than ever, and youth are critical more than ever at this moment. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Lola. Incredibly inspiring and assuring and clarifying. John, what do you make of it?
So even before this time of COVID, you really could see, at least among the students and young people that I interact with, a real search for relevance anyway. I think there's no doubt that they get this fractured relationship with the earth. They get it. And so this has been a reset, right? So what has it done in the United States? It's really revealed the fragility of our social systems, and particular housing and healthcare and others, where the real vulnerabilities are being played out in every city across this country. So hopefully this will make what has been relatively invisible more visible, and refocus where that relevance could be played out in people's future lives. But more to the immediate, I'm trying to reflect on this a little bit because I have two grandkids in high school, and their education's been disrupted, and I think this is across the world in many ways. So what does it mean? It means And I don't know if they have the skill set yet, but they have to be more self-reliant and more self-determined to get what they need out of education. The whole modality has been, you come to school and you're taught to, right? And you're given assignments and you learn and accomplish things. Now they're going to have to take more responsibility, even at an earlier age, if this continues. But fortunately, there are, and this is, I introduced this to your youth summit group. There are some wonderful tools available, and I would just recommend what's called LabXChange as a online, fully accessible platform, Harvard LabXChange, to develop curriculum and have that available to anyone, anywhere. So even these high school kids, even these kids in their 20s, could be developing knowledge content and making it accessible to everybody. So there are some opportunities here that I think this crisis presents to us to think about things in a different way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that resource as well, John. LabXChange. We'll make sure to write it in the chat as well, so we will have access to the link. Christian, how do you see this?
Well, I mean, I'm no expert on COVID-19 and don't pretend to be, but so I'll speak in more general terms. I think it's, I mean, I'm the father of 3 sons, and the oldest one is 13, and I can see how he increasingly has the 17 global goals and the impact and the curriculum. And I can see that at an extremely young age, it's starting to trouble him. And that I'm super concerned about. So my main message to all the change makers is we have to stay positive. I mean, there is so much opportunity ahead of us. I think, I mean, there's been this sub-segment in the global market that, you know, appreciated the need to buy products and services that are people and planet friendly. I think we have kind of, we have activated this, you know, human panic button in every one of us. So I think post-corona, I think we will see an increase in the demand among consumers and businesses and public organizations, realizing the need to start acting on what we're saying. So I think there's going to be an increasingly demand for sustainable solutions, products and services that are contributing to the realization of the 17 global goals. And I think you, the young changemakers, you should just go ahead and do it. I've started 2 businesses that I knew nothing about. I started in health. I had no idea. I'd studied philosophy and management, and I went and I found the right doctors and nurses, and we built it and sold it. And 4 years ago, I said, well, let's start something in travel. And we've made so many mistakes, but now we're on the right path. Well, Corona and everything, but I'm sure we'll come out. We'll have a strong position in the market. And you know, enough about that. But follow your interest. And if you want to go into the private sector, which I think is of increasingly importance, businesses play an extremely big role in getting us out of this mess, unlocking new fundraising opportunities, solving problems, and so on. I think there's great opportunity there. So just do it. And if you want any advice, find me on LinkedIn, and as you know, feel free to shoot me messages, and I'll share all the advice that I can give.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christian, for your generosity there as well. Megan, would you like us to take us home on this point?
Yes, of course. And I completely agree with what my fellow panelists have mentioned. I think that, well, starting with coronavirus, it is a serious crisis indeed, but it's not the only crisis that we're facing right now. Coronavirus has been a situation that has exemplified how is it that we're still suffering from many crises. For example, and the most obvious one, with our public health systems. But there are also many others. For example, the case in Mexico was that with people staying at home, the number of domestic violence increased. So I think this crisis has definitely exemplified how is it that there are many weaknesses in all countries in aspects related to sustainability and sustainable development. So what partnerships are needed to solve this crisis? This crisis is too big. It's not only about coronavirus, it's about pretty much complying with all the 17 SDGs, because no country so far has been able to achieve all the targets, right? And it's not going to make it by itself. So what I would recommend is pretty much going in line with what the panelists have also mentioned. We need you, like we need you to make a difference. And what is it that I recommend is that you find one of these crises that matters the most to you, one that affects you the most, ones that you feel you need to make a change about. And once you find it, try to look for the partnerships that can work for that. For example, I think one of the easiest ways to begin is with NGOs partnerships, civil society and civil society, because in this way you're going to be able to make the change that you need, and it's not as complicated as engaging with other actors. For example, one of the work that I do, and I didn't mention in my introduction, is that I collaborate with an international non-governmental organization called WFUNA, World Federation United Nations Associations. And what we do is trying to improve meaningful participation of young people, because young people are underrepresented in government, right? Obviously, my fellow panelist here, it's the exception. He's in the parliament, like being so young, but that's not the reality in the rest of the world, unless in the United Nations. So what we did is establishing partnerships with young people that want to establish a youth delegate program in their countries, and connecting them to other organizations in their countries that would be able to support them. So these kind of partnerships are important, because then when they present an initiative to the government to have the youth delegate program, they're not going to be alone, and they're going to be working together with other organizations. In addition, I think that it's important to work together with your own community. Don't forget to start there. Sometimes we see big activism and big changes, and we think that our community is not going to be enough, or we cannot do anything, but you can always start there. And that's the way that I do it. I started with my own community, and it has scaled to something bigger, but you need to know that the partnerships and the things you do have to begin from home, have to begin from where you are.
Amazing.
Daniel, just one more comment.
Sure.
It might be useful. We've been part of an Ashoka Accelerator program in the Nordic region for the last 6 months, and through that have been taught in the Ashoka systems change theory and so on. And I mean, for all the changemakers out there, look it up. I think it's publicly available, and there are some very good frameworks that can take you through the design phase and find your role in changing the existing, and how you can help mitigate the problems of today. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Christian. And in between, we've got Lab Exchange, we've got Ashoka, we've got different resources in Global Changemakers. We have a wealth of different tools that we can also keep sharing in the networks and forums that have been built over the summit. We've just only got a few minutes left. So what I want to do is offer the final chance for our panelists to speak. There's been tons of questions that have come in. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read out some of the main concerns of young people's mind, and then I'm going to hand it over to the panelists to, in 45 seconds and less, pick one of the questions if you want to answer it, or just leave a final message. But just so you've got aware, what are young people asking? Young people are asking, they're very, very thankful for the advice, but they're worried about resources. You know, I really want to start building partnerships. I really want to bring people together in my community, but how do I do this when I have absolutely no resources or funding? I really struggle with the issue of reach. I've got lots of ideas, but I really struggle talking to people in my community. So what is your advice in terms of reach? In terms of partnerships, how do I not look for any partnership, but know I'm in the right one? And also, what are some good flags for knowing that there's certain partnerships that you shouldn't build? And speaking from a young people's perspective, young people are also very interested in terms of power, how young people are often excluded from powerful institutions. How, as a small organization, do I build an equitable or horizontal partnership with a larger one? How do young people build a better space for themselves? Even if there are mechanisms, I often feel excluded and talked down to and not empowered. So those are all lots of different questions. They're just different tips. Hand it over to you, 45 seconds on a final message, and if you want to answer any of those questions, because the rest of them we'll have to answer in our networks. We'll start with you, Gillian. Take us home.
I think I'll probably have a go at the issue of resources. I think one of the key things we mustn't lose sight of is that as young people, the most important resource that we have is the ability to organize. I started an NGO when I was a change maker called Youth in Poverty, And we always worked off a zero budget, but the way we made money is we facilitated access to young people. So we worked with some marketing firms and we would participate in focus groups because they wanted to know what young people were thinking and what young people were buying. And we would sell that to them in exchange for funding for the organization. What we also did is we partnered with organizations who needed services. We were able to offer those services and do trade and skills exchanges, because sometimes it's not always about money. Sometimes it's about looking at what are the talents that you have and how you're able to monetize that. But the most important aspect is to organize, and it's to be able to identify what it is that you have and how you are able to monetize that, or you're able to trade that to improve your partnerships. And I think one of the things at the moment we need to look at is how innovative do we need to be about what we need? Because a lot of times we think we need a lot of money and a lot of resources, but most of the time you don't. I tell you, there's a lot of funding available. Even in a country like South Africa, there's a lot of funding, but it's about how you access it and finding perhaps that first partnership that's able to help you translate the difficult application processes and being able to access that. So my advice would be, if you're struggling, find some of us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and we're able to also navigate and help you through some of those troubles.
Amazing, Julian. Thank you so much. Lola, we need to keep it as short and sweet as possible.
Yeah, I will take the issue of power exclusion or inclusion and how we can partner very rapidly. Look, us in the United Nations, we value enormously the feedback and the inputs from the youth. And we really not only value, but we need it. We need it because we need to move in a different way and to be real in the actual world. So basically, following my fellow panelists, yeah, we are open. We are open to hear you. Me personally, you have my connections there, and we'll engage you to our country offices in the world with our headquarters and others to really engage and try to see if you can do something together with us. So basically, we value the youth, and we think it's absolutely necessary. We have a healthy partnership to make it happen together. And just to tell you, we're open to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola. John?
Sure. Quickly, knowing, I like that question. How do you know you're in the right partnership? We always struggle with this, right, over our whole lifetime. So I'll channel what Marshall Gantz, a fellow faculty member at the Kennedy School, says, and he's a great social organizer. He says it's not just sharing values with other people. It's what will you commit on the basis of those shared values. It's your commitment of time, money, resource, energy. So that's the key thing, is the second part is the key thing. So let me just say in conclusion, I've tuned in to some of these other panels. I want to thank the organizers. This has reconfirmed in my own mind, in the Milky Way of humanity, there are a few shining stars, and now I know there are many shining stars out from the other panelists here and the ones I've heard earlier in this summit forum. It's been delightful to be part of it, so I thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, John, for the gratitude as well. Chris?
Thank you. Well, I mean, in conclusion, I will say that it must be extremely overwhelming to be 20 years old and participate in these summits. And then when the screen goes black, where to start? So start with defining what is the major problem that really keeps you going and keeps you up at night. And once you zoom in on that problem, try to identify the major stakeholders that are part of this context and the role and the positions of these. And then, as it has been said a couple of times, reach out. I think you will all be overwhelmed and positively surprised how people will positively respond to you reaching out and asking for help. And ultimately, what it will do, it will enable you to, a little bit in line with what Gillian said, it will enable you to make an assessment on how you can create value in new ways for these stakeholders. And once you have identified the value creation potential, you can find out the amount of value and how to monetize it, and then move from there. But don't kid yourself and think that you need the whole blueprint before from the get-go. You just need to get going, and you'll be surprised how many good things will come out of it along the way.
Amazing, amazingly reassuring. Thank you so much, Christian. And finally, to take us home in terms of this round, Megan.
Thank you so much. Yes, I also think that one of the most important things is that you believe in yourself. I know it sounds something that people say all the time, but you can make a difference, and you need to believe that you can do it so that you can make it. I had the great opportunity to attend the Global Youth Summit years ago, and I remember that when I was there, I saw other change makers, and I thought to myself, what am I doing here? Like, why did they believe in me? And I'm so glad they believed in me, because if they hadn't, probably I would not be the person I am today, and wouldn't have developed the projects I did, wouldn't have represented my country at the UN. And today I just want to tell you that I believe in you, and we all believe in you. So you can start doing small changes. Just to end really fast with the questions of the resources, it doesn't have to be that complicated. The way that we have done it in my organization, you might even laugh, but we started with things very simple. We started doing raffles, for example, asking people to buy us some tickets for a raffle of maybe an iPad, and then making more money out of it. And then it evolved to getting sponsors. Also, you should approach enterprises, because enterprises often want to provide resources for activities that you do. So I think those are two of the main things that you should do. Don't be too stressed about that, and believe in yourselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Megan, and to our wonderful panelists, to Gillian, to John, to Lola, to Christian, to Megan. I'd love everyone just in their own place just to do a little silent round of applause for our wonderful panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining as well. As you'll see in the chat, there's lots of different resources to help you out. And the best thing that we can offer ourselves is each other. So in your community, online, and our amazing panelists have also offered themselves generously to support. We have a wealth of resources. Those are the most important ones. And just to finish off, the limits of the possible are very much there to be moved. So let's all do our best internally, externally, to try and challenge ourselves in this moment, to see it as a fertile moment of transformation and justice. So on that note, I'd love to thank all the organizers and all the panelists, and hand over to Gabby.
Wow, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. What an insightful, uplifting, and inspiring panel. Thank you to our panelists for making time to be here, and for leaving this message of hope and more than anything, the call to action to all young people. Let me remind you, to all participants, that this was our last panel, but not our last session. We're having a closing session in just a few minutes. So make sure to attend. We have great speakers there. Our very own Courtney is going to talk to you more about the Changemaker School, which is probably a great way for you to start and to put into action a lot of these ideas that you've been getting during the summit. And we also have two fantastic speakers. Wally Shah, a poet and activist, will share a poem with us. And Monique Coleman, actress, activist, and also UN youth advocate, will be there. So thank you so much, and goodbye. See you soon.